Well, hello, and welcome back. I hope you had a good time with Mr. Green. He has significantly better production values than I do. I wish I could have all those cool animations. Oh, well, hey, if you're good at graphic design, we can make our own. Ah, we'd become famous, I'm sure. Anyhow, I hope that was helpful and useful. I'll just say I really like how he makes it clear the value of argumentation in philosophy and for us, how it applies to ethics. I think it's very useful to know this. He does go a little bit into things like validity and some other elements, which I'm not going to go too much into. If you take a logic class, you'll go into extensive detail about those things. And so I'm not going to do that. My sense is I just want you to understand the structure of an argument so that when we start talking about them more in class, we've done a little bit of this already, but we'll want to have some tools at our disposal. And so in this video, I'm just going to talk about arguments and the components of arguments, which are statements. So let's just, I guess, dive right in. So informally, we would just say an argument is a set of statements. Statements are the building blocks. They're literally the bricks. And a statement is an assertion that something is or is not the case. A statement is always either true or false. And so we can say a few things about statements. So statements are not questions. At least genuine questions, as rhetorical questions are different. Genuine questions are not true or false. They are not asserting anything. It's just a question. An exclamation like, "Hey, you!" That's not a statement. "Hey, you!" is an exclamation. It's doing something, but it's not saying something that's either true or false. So that's the thing. A statement is trying to say something is or is not the case. So if I say, "You are smart," "Ethics is fun," these are all claims that are either true or false. I guess your experience of ethics will tell you whether or not it's fun or not. But again, that claim, "Ethics is fun," that's either true or false. And that's the basic idea. So again, that's what an argument's going to be made up of. An argument is not made up of questions. An argument is not made up of exclamations. An argument is made up of statements. Now, I should emphasize, this does not imply that we know whether a statement of it is true or false. Maybe if you've never studied ethics before, you wouldn't know whether ethics was fun or not. But the idea is that whether or not you know it, the statement is either true or false. How you come to know these things, that's obviously a bit different. But statements, an assertion, either true or false. There's lots of different kinds of statements. Most of them I think you can figure out with, as long as you understand the English language. There's nothing too tricky, I think, about statements, except for perhaps for the hypothetical statements. These are a compound statement. They bring claims together, they bring statements together in a special way. These often take the form of if-then statements. Hypothetical statements have an if-then form. So I have a couple examples here. If you take an aspirin, then your headache will go away. I'm sure you've thought about this. Have you ever had a headache? Maybe it's not aspirin, but something else. But yeah, if you take an aspirin, then your headache will go away. Or less friendly, this is kind of aggressive now that I look at it. If you get a 0 on all your exams, then you will fail the course. Now, I hope both of these statements seem intuitively true, or at least they seem reasonable. But my question is, how would you show that one of these is actually false? For instance, let's focus on the first one. If you take an aspirin, then your headache would go away. So suppose, like, say a friend, you have a headache and your friend says, "Well, hey, if you take this aspirin," they hold an aspirin up, they say, "If you take this aspirin, then your headache will go away." How would you prove your friend is false or wrong? If you think about it for a moment, it might be puzzling, but you can't just say, "Well, hey, you said that, my headache went away," because your friend can say, "Yeah, so what? If you'd taken the aspirin, your headache would have also gone away." So just saying, "Well, my headache went away on its own," doesn't prove that this hypothetical of if you take the aspirin, that doesn't prove that's false. Turns out there's only really one way you can prove a hypothetical false. You have to make the if part, which we'll call the antecedent in a moment, you have to make the if part true, so you actually have to take the aspirin. And then you show that the then part, which we'll call the consequent, you have to show that that's false. So the idea is you show that hypothetical is false as if you take the aspirin, but then your headache does not go away. Then you can say to your friend, you're wrong. I still have a headache. I took your stupid aspirin and I still have the headache. In that case, you have proven the hypothetical is wrong. But notice the hypothetical does not say you took the aspirin. It just says if you take the aspirin. The hypothetical does not claim your headache's gone away. No, it's saying if you take the aspirin, then your headache will go away. So it's made up of those two claims, taking the aspirin, your headache going away, but it establishes this special relationship that make the if part true, then the then part, it's funny, language is funny, the then part will be true as well. So the only way you can prove that wrong is to make that if part true and make the then part false. So I won't go through the zero on all your exams. I mean, obviously, if you want to test out that hypothetical, you will have to make the antecedent or the if part true, and I'd rather you didn't make that if part true. So let's just take my word for it that second hypothetical statement about the exams is absolutely true. If you do get a zero on all your exams, I think you'll know what your grade in the course will be. Okay, so that's hypothetical. They're the most complicated, the most interesting, and they often appear in arguments in subtle forms. We'll see in a bit. And so here's just where I kind of have explained out what I just said. So here it is if you want to look at it. Again, it's just a hypothetical statement. Isn't claiming the if and the then part are both true. They're claiming a relationship, a special relationship between that if statement, the antecedent, and then the then statement, the consequent. It claims that whenever the antecedent holds, you take the aspirin, you get a zero on all the exams, then that consequent must hold as well. Your headache goes away. You fail the class. So the truth or falsity of that hypothetical is just the truth or falsity of that relationship. And as I explained, it is only false when the antecedent, the if part, is true, while the consequent, the then part, is false. I hope that makes sense. Tweet if it doesn't. Oops. There we go. And so that's the bricks or the building blocks of arguments are those statements, but that's not enough to make an argument. An argument just isn't a list of statements. It's that these statements are connected in a certain way. In particular, we say that the statements are linked together by inferences. So if statements are the building blocks, the inferences are the glue that puts those statements together. And so an inference asserts the truth of one statement on the basis of one or more supporting statements. These supporting statements provide the reasons or evidence for believing the statement being affirmed. So again, we've talked about this informally already in class, that whenever you make a claim, someone can ask you why. And then when I answer why I accept this, I'm giving the reasons and evidence, the supporting statements. And those reasons and evidence are then giving you reasons to believe that initial statement. And so again, that's what an inference does. It says this statement's true because these other statements support it as reasons or evidence. So as I say here, put informally, an argument is where one statement is being defended or justified by one or more other statements. Don't worry, I'll have an example in a sec, but I want to get the idea out first. The inferences are what link the former, that is the statement being justified, to the latter, that is the evidence or reasons. Let's do an example here, a very simple one. I like picking examples from the law. They're cheesy, but lawyers are good with arguments, so I like these because I think this immediately we understand what's going on. So let's consider this following sentence. The defendant must go to jail because he is guilty of stealing the jewels. And so we can first ask, well, why is this an argument? Okay, well, there's a couple statements in here. The defendant must go to jail. That's the defendant must go to jail. That's a statement. There's another statement that the defendant is guilty of stealing the jewels. So we have a couple statements, but that's still not enough. There's an argument because one of these statements is defending the other. That is, we're being told to accept something on the basis of evidence. And so we can say, well, what's the statement being defended in this argument? It's, if you read this statement, what's the point? What am I supposed to do? Or what's being put forward? And I think you can think it's the defendant must go to jail. And then you're given a reason, one reason. Why must the defendant go to jail, you ask? Oh, because he is guilty of stealing the jewels. And that because is helpful. It's telling us, oh, because, here's the reason. What follows because is a reason. guilty of stealing the jewels. So again, this is an argument because one statement is being defended. The defendant must go to jail. And we're getting a reason or evidence for that claim, like being guilty of stealing some jewels. And so, and then again, this is just summarizing what I said. We have two statements. The defendant must go to jail. The defendant is guilty of stealing the jewels. And the word because is just indicating that the second one, the guilt, is the reason for why, or evidence for why we should punish him by sending him to jail. And all arguments are like this. We do this all the time, man. You say, you should see Tenet at a drive-in.
Tenet. It'll open the right doors. Some of the wrong ones, too.
I'm going. I got to see Tenet. I will get COVID to see this bloody movie. It sounds bonkers.
That part is a little dramatic.
If I say, you should see Tenet, you say why? And I say, because it looks awesome.
It's reversing the flow of time. Doesn't us being here now mean it never happened?
And then we can debate whether that's true or not. But again, we do this all the time. We make a claim and then we defend it with reasons. And because it's so, you must see Tenet because it's awesome. Simple little argument, right? The defendant must go to jail because guilty of stealing the jewels. We do this all the time. We're making one statement and we say it's true because of some other statements. And that can go on and get really complicated. The important thing to note is do not, though this is one sentence, yes, what you have here, the defendant must go to jail because he's guilty of stealing the jewels, one sentence, but do not treat this argument like a single statement. There are two statements that are connected by that inference that because highlights. And this is not a hypothetical. There's no if then. Both statements are being claimed to be true. I'm claiming the defendant must go to jail. I'm claiming that is true. And I'm also claiming he is guilty. I'm not saying if he's guilty, he should go to jail. I'm claiming, no, it's not if he's guilty. He is guilty. Nothing is hypothetical. So I always say, remember this basic tip. A statement is not an argument. I like simple things like this because you can put them on a t-shirt and, oh, the t-shirt is already looks like it's becoming popular. Here's a nice hipster somewhere, probably New York City, wearing, oh, I should be selling these. If I looked that good, that'd be fantastic. Anyway, a statement is not an argument. An argument is multiple statements. An argument has to have at least two statements, one supporting another. Of course, arguments can get more complicated than that. And so we then can use this idea and break it down. We can talk about premises. These are the statements that are supporting something else, another statement. That's like the starting point of an inference. And the main conclusion is the one statement. You might call it in a paper your main thesis. It's what everything is supposed to be supporting. You remember those 5-paragraph thesis papers you probably wrote in high school? Yeah, you'd always end it with, in this paper, I'll argue, blah. That's your main conclusion. And then you'd have 3 paragraphs, which each, I assume, offers one premise each. So one main conclusion, 3 premises. That's a 5-paragraph thesis, right? You probably hope you learned that in high school. But most writing is based on that. In this paper, I'll argue, blah. And then first, second, third. That's the first premise, the first reason, the second premise, the second reason, the third premise. It's a very common writing style. So if you've done a 5-paragraph thesis paper, you have done arguments. Your main conclusion was your thesis, and the premises were each reason you offered to support your thesis. Oops. And we have lots of words that help us understand when we're seeing premises. We've already seen because. There's tons, for, since, as. You can look at this list. And there's lots of so whatever follows a premise indicator is probably some kind of premise. Doesn't happen all the time. Don't be a robot. But 90% of the time, you see a phrase like one of these, that means it's a premise. And similarly, we have words like therefore, thus, hence, this implies, and so on. These are all conclusion indicators. Whatever tends to follow therefore is probably some kind of conclusion. And so again, we have words that help us indicate when are we dealing with these premises that are supporting something else, or when are we dealing with a conclusion? That's where all those premises are going to and supporting. And so now we can put these skills to use, called argument parsing. It's a pretty simple process, though obviously with complex arguments, it can get a little more challenging, but I'll just have a little process here so we can start to understand and visualize premises and conclusions within an argument. So it's always good to steps 1 and 2, find those indicator words. If you see a therefore, circle it and say that's a conclusion indicator. If you see a because or a since, you underline the conclusion indicators. You see therefore, underline it. You see a premise indicator like because, circle that. And then once you've done that, try to figure out what's the argument's main conclusion. Where is all this stuff headed? Some people like to put the main conclusion at the front. I like that. That's straightforward. Some people like to be a mystery writer and put the conclusion at the very end. So look and read it and be like, well, what's the claim? The one main claim this argument's trying to defend. Circle it. That's the main conclusion. And then look and find all the different reasons supporting that main conclusion. Those are your premises. Underline and number those. So we can already do the one we just did. The defendant must go to jail because he's guilty of stealing the jewel. We have the premise indicator, so we can circle that as I did down here. Because we know that's premise, circle it. And then that tells us, well, what follows is probably a premise. And then what came before must have been, therefore, the conclusion. So we can circle that. Because again, we said the main point of this is sending the defendant to jail, put a C in front of it. That's done. And then underline that premise, that reason for sending the defendant to jail. They're guilty of a crime. And so we can do this a few more. So here's another argument. The defendant signed a confession. Thus, he is guilty of stealing the jewels. Furthermore, we know he was present at the scene of the crime. So step 1, of course, is let's find some indicator words. I like to start with the conclusion indicator words. And we find one, good old thus. That's one I use, I think, a lot. I think I say thus and therefore very much. So we can underline that. So now we have a clue. Are there any premise indicators? There actually aren't any in this one. Some people are tempted by furthermore, but furthermore is not indicating a premise or a conclusion. It's not an inference. Furthermore is just saying, here's some more stuff, but I don't know yet. I'll have to think, what is this stuff? Is it a premise or is this a conclusion? So furthermore doesn't get marked. It's just saying, here's some more stuff, but I don't know what kind of stuff we're getting until I think about it. Now we can identify the main conclusion, that thus. Pretty helpful there. He is guilty of stealing the jewels. And I think if you reread that sentence, it seems pretty clear that the point of this is all this is trying to show the guilt, why they're guilty. And now we can go and find the reasons why they're guilty. Well, 1, signed a confession. 2, present at the scene of the crime. These are 2 different reasons for why this person's guilty. And that's it. We've parsed it into its premises and conclusion. Again, that's what parsing's about. Identifying the statements and then determining is the statement a premise or a conclusion. Example 3. The jewels were found in the defendant's pocket and they would only be there if he stole them. Therefore, he is guilty of stealing the jewels. So let's again see if we can find any indicator words. We'll start with the conclusion indicators. And I told you I like that word therefore. Man, my writing's so predictable. So we can underline and mark that as a conclusion indicator. That's very helpful. No premise indicators. I'm being pretty mean. No premise indicators. So nothing to circle for that. But that's okay. The next step is to find the conclusion. And hey, that indicator word told us. And I think if you think about it again, we're seeing some more reasons in this little paragraph about why the defendant is guilty of stealing the jewels. And so now we can look back and think, what are the reasons we're given for thinking this person is guilty? And once more, we're given 2 reasons. Well, the jewels were in their pocket. And hey, they would only be in this pocket if he stole them. By the way, you notice number 2 there, that's a hypothetical. But 1 is helping with that, right? Because 2 is just saying, well, they're there only if he stole them. But then we find out with 1, oh, well, that's where they were, in his pockets. So again, we'll come back to that idea in the next video about how that hypothetical might be doing something special. But at least you can see we have 2 reasons to think here that they're guilty. They were in the pockets and they would only be there if they were stolen. And again, that's the logical structure. We've broken this guy down into its premises and conclusions. And the indicator word gave us a big assist in that. Let's do the 4th example. Ooh, this one might be a little more tricky because I'm mean. The defendant was present at the scene of the crime because his fingerprints are on the safe. We know about these fingerprints because the forensic report confirms it. So let's first look for our indicator words. Ooh, I was mean this time. No conclusion indicator. And you'll see why I'm really mean with this one in a moment. All right, well, let's see if there's any premise indicators. Well, the most common premise indicator word is because. And so we got a couple becauses in there. So that's helpful. So at least we know what's following these words are probably going to be some kind of premise. That is useful. So let's first, though, we have to read this now and think, okay, so what's the conclusion? That is to say, what is the one main point that this argument is making? And you have to think about it. The premise indicators give us a little sense because probably giving us a sense of where to start looking. And I think if you think about it, you'll see the defendant was present at the scene of the crime. And we're given reasons now to believe that the defendant was present at the scene of the crime. And so now we can underline the rest of the premises. And we're told, well, why should we believe they're at the scene of the crime? Well, their fingerprints were on the safe. And we're told the forensic report confirms that those were the defendant's fingerprints. It's tempting to underline what I've shown there that we know about these fingerprints, but notice that's just repeating that the fingerprints are on the safe while also setting out premise 2. There's really nothing new in there. It's just kind of offering some context for mentioning the forensics report. So again, we're told the defendant was present. Why? The fingerprints were on the safe. Well, how do you know those were the defendant's fingerprints? Ah, the forensic report confirms it. So again, the main conclusion is showing that the defendant was present at the scene of the crime and then being asked repeatedly why. Why were they present? Fingerprints were on the safe. Well, why do I believe those are his fingerprints? Ah, the forensic report. That claim about we know about these fingerprints just giving us context, but not really saying anything new. Or at least nothing that's helping us with the argument. It's something else. Oops. And so again, we've now broken this sucker down. We've parsed it into its components. And so I'll just conclude this video now about, well, what is an argument? An argument is a collection of statements about which the claim is made that the truth of all the premises, remember the premises are the reasons, the evidence, the support. We're claiming that if all those are true, then you can trust or believe the conclusion. Now, this should sound familiar from Mr. Green's video you just watched. That's the idea of arguments, and especially with validity, is that the premises are supposed to entail the truth of the conclusion. So the argument is asserting that the conclusion can be inferred from the premise. That is, an argument claims that if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true as well. Excuse me, I had just had some tea. Yes, that is a hypothetical statement. And if we took a logic course, we'd have a lot of fun with that. I won't put you through that ringer. I think, though, I just want the more basic idea that an argument is a collection of statements. And what an argument is saying is that one of those statements, which we'll call the main conclusion, is true because you can accept, it's true because the premises are true. There we go. So I think I mangled that a bit, but you got the slide in front of you. You get where I'm going. You watch that other video. I think you got the idea. All right. I have no idea how long that was. Hopefully not too long. But again, you might want to pause in places and look. Definitely the premise indicators might be one worth taking a screen cap of. But hopefully you have a sense now of at least, an argument being a collection of statements, and they have a certain form that the inferences bring to it. And I like this idea of saying an argument has a shape, because the next video, I'm going to talk about how we could actually literally visualize it with a diagram or a map, if you will. So, hey, I'm going to have a little more tea. My throat's a little parched. Why don't you stretch your legs for a minute and take a breather, smoke them if you got them, and we'll come back and talk about how to build on what we've just learned and start diagramming arguments. All right, take a moment and I'll see you back here in a sec.